Hey everyone, this is Jack and Rob here. We're bringing you the first of several podcasts about discussing film and television from the last century or so. Today we will be discussing the films Interview with the Vampire and Alone in the Dark as examples of more fantastical, horror-tinged concepts put into popular cinema. So, Rob, I think the first one we're going to discuss is Interview with the Vampire.
Yes.
Hmm.
I'll give like a brief plot synopsis as it begins with in modern day New York, and we focus on Louis, who is revealed immediately to be a vampire, and he's being interviewed by a really curious writer who asks him to tell him his life story, and Louis does tell him his life story, and we see the entire process of like when he first became a vampire and the life that he lived after that point. And the story itself is very complicated, but basically it involves another vampire named Leslie coming to him, turning him into a vampire, leading him on like a path of killing, and then turning a little girl into a vampire named Claudia, and then and then from that point on it becomes like increasingly bloody, increasingly complicated, and it gets much bigger as it goes on.
I think it's very much a morality tale, just trying to watch these characters grapple with what they are and how they survive, and I think it kind of shows very strongly the contrasting perspectives between Lestat, Claudia, and Louis, and it paints a very different picture of some of the underground of history and how these vampires, if they were real, might move through it, which I found it personally very interesting.
I would say if there's any like kind of central theme, it's that film kind of begins with Louis being like really, really reluctant to kill anyone. And then it ends with him just mercilessly slaughtering other vampires. It's like he never truly becomes evil, but he does become much more of an anti-hero, I think. Like he starts out as kind of a tragic hero, and then he turns into more of an anti-hero who is willing to kill people.
I think what's very interesting about the film is it really does suggest that immortality is such an unnatural thing for humans to go through, that their morality just breaks after that time, which is quite interesting because it makes vampires almost completely amoral as a thing, completely outside of it, which is quite a fascinating concept. I think the conflict of watching Louis, this new vampire who's still very much human in some ways, evolve and change as the story forces him to, is really quite a fascinating degradation to watch until he kind of has this more emotionless kind of calm sheen throughout that we associate with the vampire.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to like the story itself and the structure. I think that the film can kind of be split up into two halves as well. Obviously you can split it up between like the bits in modern day and the flashbacks, but the flashbacks take up a lot of the film. I would say you can split it up between the first hour and the second hour. The first hour is basically Louis and Leslie, and the second hour is basically Louis, Claudia, and then Armand, the other vampire that they meet. And personally speaking, I kind of found the first hour to be more compelling than the second hour, and that's just because the first hour, like weirdly, I mean, it connected most to like what these themes that you're talking about, but also it kind of had it just had this like very strange appeal. It had this strange appeal in just seeing these two people who are kind of forced to be like best friends, but who also clearly couldn't be more opposite in terms of morals. It's like, but they still have to like work together, and they still have to like be each other's support, and I found that to be like really compelling.
I think seeing that really toxic dependency in that relationship was really quite fascinating. I think Lestat in the film as well is such a charismatic presence as well, that even though the rest of the film is still of a high quality, I'd say it still works pretty well. You do miss that presence. I
Yeah.
think he is that, I don't know, almost more liberated force in the film, and then you kind of get that feeling of excitement when he's on screen, because you don't know quite what I mean, you know roughly what he's going to do, but at the same time you don't know quite what he's going to do. I think in comparison to Louis, who, although interesting, is a bit more, I don't know, miserable would be the word I'd use, and a bit
Yeah,
more
I agree.
melancholic and traditionally heroic in some ways, or at least what we would consider a decent person for a lot of it.
Yeah.
It kind of really makes his straight man kind of role not, it doesn't have the same thing to bounce off of. So while he's still interesting because we've invested in him, Armand, I don't find a strong enough figure for Louis to bounce off of.
It does slightly feel between the first half and the second half that there is like a different story being told in each of them. Like you could almost consider the bit where Leslie seemingly gets killed twice. You could almost consider that to be like the end of one story, and then you're seeing the beginning of another story, which is Louis and Claudia on their kind of on their own, and then they go and they discover this like entire secret society of vampires. It feels a bit tonally disconnected from the first half.
I'm not sure I massively agree with that, actually. I think Louis being the anchor, the story is obviously his throughout the film, and although we get sucked into the characters we've not really seen as much, like Claudia, a child vampire. That's just a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
Or, and we get sucked into the world. I think we forget that it's Louis' story sometimes, which is why you get that slight disconnect. But when you focus on Louis as the character, who the story is actually about, it's still the same story. It's almost like the two stages of how he got there. It's like the modern day is almost like his final form, if you like. First hour is him moving into being a bit of a colder vampire, but not quite all of the way there yet. And then the second story kind of just breaks him.
Yeah.
Second hour, I find that, I think from that perspective, it's structured really well. I wouldn't call it a 3-act film, to be honest. If I was to break it down structure, I mean, I know you could probably put it into that, but it feels more like 2 long acts, more like how a play is structured. And then you've got the modern day stuff to just kind of bookend it.
On occasion, it kind of cuts back to it, but
Yeah,
I mean, and to be honest, actually, I will say that they did a good job of that, because, in a lot of films that use framing devices, I can't think of that many. Like obviously there are some like famous films that have used framing devices as well, but oftentimes it can be a bad thing, it can kind of make a story feel more like convoluted, or it can decrease tension in a story, or something like that, But this film, it used the framing device well, and whenever it cut back to it, it didn't feel too like jarring. And I think that's probably just because of the narration, and even the narration I actually thought was like quite good as well. It didn't feel like it was just explaining stuff that you didn't need to know. It was like it was giving you insight into Louis.
Narration should be used in film for me. Like, it's a great example actually, because it doesn't sit there and try and explain like the history of the world so much. It kind of establishes where you need to be a lot of the time, and Louis' internal thoughts, which again, usually you should want to visualize those, but it covers time that we don't need to see, like them jumping from the plantation that they clearly spent a bit of time on, to, I think it was Paris, the streets of Paris.
Yeah.
Which you don't need to see that jump. He just covered it in about, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 seconds in the narration. It just worked.
Yeah.
Everything essential to the story that we needed visually, we got visually. So, it did add a bit of nuance. And I think especially, although we're not going into it yet, in comparison to Alone in the Dark and its opening narration, it was a lot more useful narration in Interview with the Vampire than Alone in the Dark, because I'd got the same information about 3 minutes into that film. But that's all I'm going to say about that for now.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to say, actually, into the Vampire, I thought the performances were really good. Like,
I was going to talk about that. So I would say that this is easily So Tom Cruise plays Leslat, and this to me is easily like one of his like best performances by far. It's very against type, although actually like in sort of a funny way. If you look at it, you could almost say that character is kind of close to Tom Cruise in a few ways. People make big deals about the fact that Tom Cruise doesn't age. You know, like the fact that he permanently just looks the same. So you could kind of say on that level, and the fact that he's able to do all these like physical feats, it's like, well, Leslie can do those things as well. So, but apart from that, apart from those like funny comparisons, it is really, really like interesting to see Tom Cruise play such a like again villainous character, but he is just so insanely charismatic that you like him.
Yeah, well, I think the blocking especially really helps out that performance with the stat because don't go wrong, the work that Tom Cruise does is fantastic, and that way that he plays it, but the way that he's directed to move as well and incorporate the set, I think that's really quite impressive. Like there's always a clear line between him and Louis, even when they're inches from each other. There's always this clear space that doesn't ever get bridged, and like on the plantation when they're meant to be quite close, they're eating opposite ends of the table, and yes, that's partially class, but it's also a very classical film symbol to separate characters from each other in space. And I found that to be just a nice foreshadowing for where they're going to be going.
In terms of staging, I'm also just thinking about like the first time you see Leslie, and that's when he finds Louis, and then when he turns Louis into the vampire. Like, because that entire sequence is really, really like that entire sequence to me felt very like aggressive, and that could be something about the way that he just kind of dominates over Louis, essentially, like just doesn't give Louis a choice at all.
Well, I think that scene is absolutely a seduction. And I think one thing that obviously has been made a lot out of this film, and I think it's true, is there's a massive homoerotic. To call it an undercurrent would actually just be insulting because it's quite clearly a homoerotic bend to a lot of the relationships.
What it almost feels like, it feels like a bizarrely twisted, weird romantic comedy. Or I mean, there are some funny moments in the first bit of it. There is actually some humor in terms of their interactions.
I think a lot of the film is shot to really kind of suggest a romantic inclusion. I mean, you kind of get a lot of shots of lips very close to the neck, and yeah, that's vampiric, but for a long time it looks like they're almost going to kiss the neck before they bite it. You know what I mean? And then you
yeah. I think you even see a bit where Leslie see that he's like taking away a man or something to be to bite the neck of or something. It's I think it's during like that party bit where Louis is like trying to like kill humans, but he can't kill humans. There's a bit where Leslie is taking away a young man or something to presumably kill or something, feast on. So that kind of has suggestions, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think also the makeup really does help suggest an erotic undercurrent as well, because I'm not sure if you know, but they really emphasize like the lips doing it, and they make the eyes this very magnetic force for them, which, and I'm usually not a fan of the sexualization of vampires because I'm very, very into vampire folklore, and I prefer the idea of them as these, really wretched creatures. But the allure, since Dracula, obviously, there's been more and more sexualization until we've gotten to the point of Twilight and things like that, where it is clearly just a sexual fantasy. But I think Interview with the Vampire has that balance between that sexualization that you kind of uses that undertones of the vampire that's existed cinematically for, well, I'd say since the 1950s, and then brings in that danger again, that animalistic, and it kind of marries the two concepts together, which I found quite interesting to see sexualization and danger as a similar thing. It's like it's a precipice.
And that does continue even when Leslie is seemingly killed, because again, to go with the whole like romantic comedy style angle and stuff, it's almost like that's like the breakup, and then afterwards it's like you can almost argue that Armand is almost like a rebound or something, but then Armand betrays him, like by setting up Claudia to die, basically.
Who's effectively his daughter at this point.
Like, so he does that, and then but he still saves Louis, because I presume, despite what he did, he still wants Louis to like be on his side, but then Louis just tells him no, I don't want to be with you essentially, and then goes off. And
I
then
think
the
the major
yeah
thing that's very much underneath every character in the film is this search for love and belonging and connection. I mean, a lot of Claudia's kind of anger at herself
hmm
comes from that she's a child. She's a child physically, but she's an adult mentally, and she can't fall in love with anyone
hmm
because she's so young. It
hmm
just it's just very, very, very wrong. So,
yeah
I think that you see that rage really just stuck deep inside her, and I think it's quite an interesting dynamic because Lestat clearly loves Louis, and you kind of have that. It's why he keeps him around, even though they're nothing like each other. And Armand
hmm
clearly has a thing for Louis as well.
yeah
Louis is kind of the one person who doesn't really need that connection throughout the film. That's something he
hmm
learns going forward because that
yeah
dependency on Lestat screwed him up, and then you kind of get that. I think structurally, it's almost watching apathy set into Louis, the same apathy
hmm
that
yeah
the vampires have, but are trying not to have. And I find that really quite a fascinating thing because it does suggest that even though Louis seems strong and powerful now, that one day he's gonna be like Armand and the stats, and he's gonna go into that real need for connection that he
yeah.
doesn't
So
have.
as a result, but you do see uh, like he's given the chance to do that at the end when the interviewer Daniel when Daniel's all like I want you to turn me into a vampire. He's like, no, and then he just leaves, like, so I think now, like, for that, at that point, he's thinking to himself, like, oh no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna turn anybody to be my companion. But at the same time, though, you also see that at the end of the film, you do get the sense that the cycle was beginning again because Leslie fights Daniel, and then you have that kind of ominous final line where he says, like, I'm going to give you the choice I never had. So presumably what he has learned is that, like, not everybody can deal with being a vampire. I think that Leslie is at least willing to be like, I'll give you the choice to be a vampire or not. And we know that Daniel wants to be a vampire as well. But to some degree, the cycle could begin again. Daniel could go through the same arc as Louis,
That cycle is really made to look horrific with the kind of the way they do the cinematography and the lighting, especially in certain shots, like the shot of Claudia when she's in that pit with this woman that she's turned to have her own companion. It's
hmm
quite horrifying, like that,
hmm
just almost like ashen statue kind of thing.
hmm
Shots like that, a lot, as well as that dark of the New York night, and I think those kind of things really emphasize just how horrific it can be, and I think the eternal existence as well is really made to just show that because you then get that withered shot of Lestat in the armchair.
I was a little bit confused at that point. I might have missed some lines of dialogue, so maybe just clarify this if you know. But I'm just wondering, like, was the implication that he hadn't like feasted on anybody in a while?
Yeah,
Was that?
he hadn't been drinking from humans in a while was the implication.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering why that is. I mean, do you think
Well,
it's just
I think it was
because?
just because he wasn't strong enough.
Hmm
Like Lestat as well. Lestat actually needs companions because it's part of his vanity, the character.
Yeah.
I think without someone there with him, he didn't
hmm
know how to get it done.
I can kind of see that. It's
So
like, yeah.
I mean, in film, he spent 70 years with Louis,
hmm
thereabouts,
Yeah.
and Claudia around as well for
hmm
quite a bit of that. So
hmm
I think without his partners in a much weakened state, all he really had that he could catch properly
hmm
were things like rats and things. Because all of his usual advantages were dead as well. I mean, he wasn't that handsome anymore and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was just wondering. And I didn't think that this was like a plot hole or anything, but I was just wondering about this. At the end of it, Leslat intercepts Daniel when he's like driving on the Golden Gate Bridge, and a part of me is just wondering like if that's a coincidence or if Leslie somehow like knew something, because it does seem like a massive coincidence that he would just so happen to drop in the car of the guy who had been interviewing his former companion.
I
Um,
feel that. I from what I took from that is that either Louis had tipped him off about the interview.
mhm,
I think Louis, in his own way, does still love Lestat,
Hmm.
even though it's a very different kind of love by that point. I always found that either Lestat followed him because, again, he's an obsessive, jealous lover,
Hmm. Yeah.
or you had Louis tip him off. And I think, it's one of those things where they just develop that kind of connection and it keeps going. And I think as well, when you look at the film, even though it was coincidental, it seemed very in keeping with Lestat's character for sure. One thing about the film as well that I really loved was just the kind of production design of it. I mean,
Hmm.
they really, not only was it just accurate to the period, but they really used beauty really really well in the film
Hmm.
because yeah, when I examined this film previously, I saw it as almost a celebration of beauty, and I saw it also as a warning that sometimes the most vicious killers are the most beautiful things going.
Hmm.
The film is very much about killing in a way, and doing it for survival and beauty and continued livelihood. Because we seen what doesn't, and it is very much about a society that does value beauty over life, and you really
Hmm.
see that with I mean, there's a lot of gorgeous wide shots in the film that have
Hmm. Yeah.
wonderful light. And the nighttime always looks quite sleek and sexy, except for when Louis is like doing things like feasting on rats in the sewers and things like that, where they,
Yeah.
really dilapidate it. But there's a real sense of glamour to the vampires and the way that they dress. I mean, their costumes are so grand.
I
They look
know.
like such
Yeah.
a glorious thing, especially Armand's like it's a red lined cape, isn't it, that he wears?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and it instantly recalls ideas of Spain because Antonio Banderas and
Yeah. Uh-huh.
of blood and just of kind of class to it.
No, I agree with the visual. It's not necessarily like a very like outwardly stylishly directed film, but there is that like that sense of allure that does pull you into it. And I do have to say the opening credits I thought were like really really excellent because it was kind of touching upon what you said about like nightlife. But also, I really like the combination of the music and the panning over New York and then the zooming into the crowd and then going all the way to that room. I don't know why, but that bit's the kind of opening that just pulls you in, and it's the kind and then in the conversation that follows creates a lot of intrigue and it creates a lot of like atmosphere as well. It just kind of pulls you in, and that's to me one of the best aspects of the film is that it does pull you into the story that it's telling.
I have to say it is one of the most engaging vampire films I've ever seen because
Hmm.
I mean I love vampire films.
Hmm.
But quite a lot, especially more modern vampire films. You get a lot
Hmm.
of either they over-egg the vampire to the point that there's not much mystery and I don't care,
Hmm.
or they kind of do this weird hunting scenario where it's this weird action thing where you kind of get all these hunters and their kind of tech gizmos,
Hmm.
which to me, verges a bit more on sci-fi than horror. And I think the
Yeah.
vampire should be a horror figure first and foremost. Whether you want to bring
Hmm.
in romance or whatever, fine.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
think the horror can get forgotten a lot. And
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I think Interview with the Vampire tells it as a horror drama, and you get the
Hmm.
vampire just intensely powerful, unknowable figure to the point that they don't even know their own desires in the film, which I find
Hmm.
just fascinating. So you
Yeah.
get the horror on a very existential level. The
Hmm.
film is
Yeah.
very much about the horror of immortality.
There is some violence in the film, but
Mm.
actually there's quite a lot of violence in the film, but it's never like too gory. I didn't expect this. There are actually quite a few jump scares as well, but
Mm.
for the most part, again, they're fairly well done. They're not like there's not a scene where I don't know somebody's walking and then a cat drops out of the sky. It's like these the times where there are jump scares is when like somebody pounces on somebody else all of a sudden, and actually like in particular the bit where Louis just all of a sudden like grabs Daniel the writer and just pushes him up to the ceiling. Like I really jumped at that because I wasn't expecting it at all.
Yeah. It's less. They weren't. It was less that the filmmakers were trying to like go, oh, we're faking it, but they gave moments that needed a jump, and I think
Mhm.
that's you know that was what was really really well done about it. They didn't really use fake out scares a lot.
No, no,
It was
no,
very
no. I don't think that there were any.
no, it was a very direct, and it was the situation that got you into it, and they set it up
Mhm.
well in the script, and then when you had that jump and that switch, you got that zero, you got that change in expression was kind of
Mhm.
shown, nice and close, and it's like
Hmm.
literally just this 0.1 second thing, and I mean, I and you don't know what it is, and then you see that jump, and you connect that that slight change
Hmm.
was then a, oh, he's going to attack change, okay,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
when you're processing that, it makes it kind of hit because you kind of know, and then it gets confirmed for you, and it really just makes the moment land that much better, I think.
Hmm.
That's one thing about the direction that I really, really liked. They made sure to have that.
So what you said about like the acting earlier, like I thought that like for the most part every single actor was really good, like especially like what like Kirsten Dunst was like 12 or something at the
Oh,
time. She was
oh,
as old
Kristen
as
Dunst was fantastic. Like,
yeah, I know. It was like it was a very like challenging role for like a child actress, especially because like in the original book that this was based on. Have you read that book?
yeah, I read the book.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, in the original book, she was like 5 years old, but obviously you couldn't get like they're there to age it up, obviously, because you couldn't get a 5-year old to do that stuff. But like, but yeah, it was a very like challenging role, but like it showed off that she was a really really good actress. And I'll say that even a couple of like the kind of extras were good. Like
Mm.
in particular, the bit where that really long uncomfortable scene where like Louis is or where Leslie is just trying to get Louis to kill that woman. I think she was like a prostitute or something. Like he was with like a prostitute and he was trying to get him to kill her. And even her acting was really really good.
I think that's my favourite scene from the film. Actually, that moment where
Uh-huh.
Lestat and Louis are in that boudoir, and then it seems romantic, and then it goes. You see it go sexual, and then you know it's going to go. And obviously,
Yeah.
Lestat does bite, and then watching the reaction from the other prostitute, and then Louis and Lestat really going at each other was just. I think that was just really really masterfully done, and the performance
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
sold it. It was directed really well. You had that musical shift that was really, really
Hmm.
nice. It almost
Yeah.
reminded me of a moment in American Psycho, actually.
Oh really? Oh, what scene did it remind you of?
Do you know the bit before he chases the woman with the chainsaw, where he's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
go visit and he literally starts eating the woman.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of quite similar in that way to me. I mean,
Yeah.
a bit more stylized and less grisly in that way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I really, that moment, I think that was just a perfect moment of horror because you had the moment where it seemed normal and then your brain
Mhm.
kicks in.
I found it mostly scary. It just goes on for so long, and and like he's doing this stuff to this woman. He's trying to get Louis to like join in, and Louis keeps on refusing. So it's really, I would say it was less like, I mean, it was scary, but I would say it's less scary, but more just uncomfortable because you're just like, oh my god, this guy is a psycho, and he's trying to get Louis to like, to do something as bad, and he keeps on doing it. He's like, come on, Louis, do this, and he's like I can't remember what the exact line was.
He's really shouting, you are a killer, Louis, and all of that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
watching Louis kind of try and deny that to himself, it really kind of sets up what the conflict is for the character going forward. And I think with Louis, that is always the conflict that he's got going on, even throughout the
Hmm.
film, even once he's accepted that he might have to kill humans sometimes. He's still very, very much he seems the type to kind of limit it as much as possible, and he doesn't, ever strike the viewer as someone who ever gets like the stat.
You could kind of say at the end he gains a bit of that homicidal rage, but that's purely out of revenge. Where like when he like goes in and sets all those vampires on fire, which like is a very like satisfying scene, but it is definitely the moment where you kind of go like, wow, if this guy had any kind of morality, then then this is a sign that he's kind of lost it, that he's just mercilessly killing these people, or well, I wouldn't say mercilessly because he's driven by emotion and revenge and stuff, like a
I mean,
desire to avenge
it's
his
still
daughter.
merciless. I mean, he
Yeah,
might be a good reason for it, but it's still merciless. But I think,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think whether it's, and again, that depends on what your morals are on retribution and things like that. You can
Hmm.
tell he's not the same morally that he was before,
Hmm.
and you
Yeah.
can see that almost a corrosive effect is, such a long life and so many tragic experiences have kind of had on him. And
Hmm.
I think that is, while relentlessly depressing on an existential level to watch, is a really compelling.
It is kind of satisfying in the moment because you just because you're just like, oh my god, these people, like they killed a little girl and an innocent woman, and like they killed his daughter, so therefore you do want to see him get revenge, but yeah,
Yeah,
you can kind of
yeah,
tell like he's lost it.
yeah. I think that feeds into the overall tragedy of the film because I think the film is very much a tragedy, and I think
Hmm.
scenes like
Yeah, yeah.
that really are ones that really play into it. And also the scene where he can't help himself and he has to feed on Claudia. Moments like that really, really work.
Yeah,
I
like the
think,
bit where Claudia gets turned, you mean?
yeah,
Like
like
that
when
bit.
he's kind of trying to be comforting and then he kind of hears it and he smells it and he sees it, and I think that's directed really, really well because you get to see the little changes and you get to see that object, and I think the editing in that scene is really good as well actually because you get to
Hmm.
see each little moment and it really builds and pressurizes and comes in and it comes in, and then obviously you get that release in a wide when he finally drinks, but it's not like this quick rapid succession of cuts. It's this just very methodically kind of thing. You get to just watch him lose it. I just find that so compelling.
As good as the Louis character is, I do think if there is a bit of a central weakness to the film, it's kind of Brad Pitt's like performance. It's not like a bad performance at all, but it's very. I think you brought it up earlier where you say that that he's kind of like the straight man to Leslie. Even during those points, I was still thinking to myself that I didn't necessarily think that Pitt was bringing much to the role. I thought like he was playing him as he was written, but I didn't think that he had a lot of charisma. I thought that he was a bit drippy.
Didn't feel active at all, and
Hmm.
I think that's because right up until kind of the end, he isn't that active of a character. Like,
Hmm.
though he kind of chooses to become a vampire, it's clearly quite a coerced choice. And then he
Hmm.
kind of gets
Yeah,
dragged through the film and kind of made to do stuff, only
yeah.
ever reacting to stimuli that's in front of him. Like even when they kill the snap for the first time, um, it's Claudia who really does it,
Yeah.
and then Louis kind of just tries to fix the situation, and that's what he kind
Mhm.
of does throughout the film, and because of that, he doesn't really have a goal of his own, and I think
Yeah.
that's really what holds the film back. Like I think it's still a very, very compelling watch. I really do love this film, but I think its central problem is the goal for Louis isn't very clearly defined. It is this ethereal thing, which is the same with all the vampires. I think everyone's
Mhm.
goal is to try and form a connection. They don't exactly,
Mhm.
that's not with Louis especially. That's not made very clear. Um, it's more, it's like his goal is to try and hold on to his own humanity, except halfway through that's clearly shifted. So I think because he doesn't really take many steps towards his actual goal,
Mhm.
that his character just feels a bit flatter than the others. I think Brad Pitt does play him as he's written, and he doesn't bring his usual trademark charisma. I think he tries with it, but I think because of the way the character is structured and set up, I just don't think that there is room in that character to kind of push that. And although it works for the story, it makes it more tragic because Louis really is a victim of fate and not his choices.
Mhm.
At the same time, it doesn't make for the most engaging lead, but because the supporting
Yeah.
cast
Mhm.
is so incredible and the themes and story as it is actually really, really interesting on its own, even with a bit of a bland central character, it still
Mhm.
works really, really well. I would
Yeah.
say it's probably it's one of my favorite vampire films. It really
Mhm.
is. I would put it probably third.
Yeah. If it's so if you were to rank it,
Yeah,
that's kind of
in
what.
terms of my vampire films that I like, I would probably put it yeah, behind Dracula 1958 and Dracula 1931.
I haven't seen a lot of vampire movies.
In a few podcasts time, I think we're going to be looking at the 1958 Dracula.
Well, we can look at both 1958 and 1931. If you want to compare them, maybe.
I mean, yeah, I'd be very, very happy to do that. And
Hmm.
vampire films, I'm always happy to sit down and watch a vampire film, even
Yeah. Hmm.
even when they're crap.
Yeah.
I think this one especially is a really, really good starting point into getting into vampire films because it uses a lot of the tropes that you know, but also
Hmm.
pushes them in directions that you don't expect. And
Yeah. Hmm.
I think that's really, really great.
So one funny thing that I just noticed during the film as well, that they show Louis going to like a cinema. You see him watching like Nosferatu as well. and
So
that's like one of the early vampire films, and I
yeah,
thought that
that
that was
is
kind of
one of the most meta moments I have seen in a film. But it is, I think that's a perfect use of intertextuality as well, because he
Mhm.
does, he does often. I think there is an offhanded line where he mentions meeting an Irish author in a pub, which is at one point and accidentally inspiring vampires. Or I
Mhm.
don't know if that's him or if that's a stat from the books. I can't remember. But there is the implication, obviously, that humans have encountered vampires and then written these stories about them, and that
Yeah.
especially in their modern interpretations, maybe they've met someone like Louis or Lestat, and I think that
Mhm.
implication is really quite nice. And the way that they also, because the film is obviously about coming to terms with the self in some way as well. I think seeing the image of the vampire as monster reflected on screen, especially for Louis, was quite a poignant moment because it really
Yeah.
does
Mhm.
distill everything he doesn't want to be in one image. Is Nosferatu.
Yeah, that is actually an interesting kind of read. I mean, it's not like, I mean, it does just kind of go by, but but when you think about it, it's like if Louis is observing that, he must be like Count Orlok or whatever his name is in the film.
Yeah, it's Count
It's
Orlok.
like he is on the outside as all of the vampires that I've counted on the inside are, if
Mm.
that makes sense. But it does make you wonder, like, like if Nosferatu exists, does that mean that Dracula exists? Does that mean that like does vampire fiction in general exist? Does like
Well,
every major
I think
vampire
very
film
clearly, I
exist?
think it very clearly does in the film, and I think what's interesting is that vampires in culture as well. You know, by the interview that Louis gives himself, it's suggested to come from vampires' own vanity, and I think a really interesting kind of interlink in the film is between the vampire. I think this is why they need the connection because it's between
Hmm.
vampires' vanity at their own power
Hmm.
and their absolute self hatred, and I think it's there in
Hmm.
everyone. Like you see it a
Hmm.
bit in Armand when he's made that decision and he's trying to get Louis, but he knows he can't, and you see that moment where it
Hmm.
hits him, and then that self hatred that you see driving in Louis, you see it in another vampire for the first time. Claudia,
Yeah.
again, comes from her self hatred at the fact that she looks like a child. She hates it in herself as well. I think that's probably one of the most fascinating things about the film, and I think it really does again speak to that really tragic tone that it keeps. I think we're both agreed that we kind of enjoy the film, we like the tragedy, but our
Yeah.
major issue with it is more Brad Pitt's performance
Kind.
and
Yeah.
the film and the writing of the main character kind of leads it to being bland. And while it has enough to make up, while the film has enough to make up for that blandness in the central character, it still
Yeah, if there is any kind of a weakness to the film, it probably would be that. And I do think that the first half is a lot stronger than the second half. But at the same time, I do think that the ending makes up for that feeling. Them bringing Leslie back to me was like the thing that made the ending really work for me.
yeah, I
Um,
think it was
yeah.
it's quite interesting actually that everyone I've spoken to who sees the film really does love Lestat, and so did the readers of the book, which is why the book series then starts focusing on him from that point onwards, which is
Yeah.
I just find really fascinating. Although they did actually do a film that focused on Lestat for afterwards called Queen of the Damned. It's not nearly as good
Hmm.
as the original. I think it's
Hmm.
because it doesn't have that tragedy, and b it kind of goes into one of those CGI fests again with the vampire's
Hmm.
powers. And I think what the imagery with the vampire did was their powers were very practically done,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
like it was like wire work, or it was
Yeah.
the way they moved the camera angle. And I think
Hmm.
that really helped sell it 'cause it just felt very real. I think
Hmm. Yeah.
again with supernatural films, especially made modern, I think that's quite a bit of the problem because a lot of it you just don't buy so much because they do decide to use CGI where they don't need to. And I
Yeah, or it just becomes a bit like overblown, like if you watch like a lot of like the underworld films or whatever, a
yeah
lot of it is just like yeah, people jumping around, fighting each other. It again in this one, it's I mean a quality about it, an interesting quality about it is the fact that like although yeah obviously it is fantastical because of the presence of the vampires, for the most part it does seem like a story that could happen. There's nothing in it aside from maybe the existence of this secret underground group of vampires. For the most part there's nothing in it that you would disbelieve, like if you were hearing this story. I mean, I know that sounds strange because again, it is vampires, but let's just say that you knew vampires existed in this world. If you knew
Yeah.
that they existed for sure, and Daniel, the writer, he kind of does know from the beginning that Louis is telling the truth.
Mm.
You wouldn't disbelieve anything that Louis was saying.
No, it's a very, very plausible story, I think.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that really helps it. Now, to move
Hmm.
on to a story that doesn't feel particularly plausible, let's
Yeah.
talk about Alone in the Dark.
Well, welcome to part two of our discussion, where we go from Interview with the Vampire to Alone in the Dark, aka a film that we both quite like, to a film that we don't like so much. In terms of any kind of a plot summary, I don't know if I could give that, but Jack, let's see if you can this time.
Yeah, so it follows Edward Carnby, who's this paranormal investigator, and kind of opens on his childhood, where he's this one child to escape from uh, this clearly amoral experiment from which we helpfully get from the disgust of a nun, and
Hmm.
it kind of follows him as he's trying to find out more about his childhood, which he's kind of played by memories and nightmares of it, but doesn't fully remember. And he hunts these people who have been altered to the point that they're really really strong and they're basically invulnerable, but they can't really feel pain and things like that, and their nervous system is shut down, but they can still be killed with special bullets. And it kind of follows him working with Bureau 713 as he tries to hunt down these artifacts from the Akabi and stop a door to a world of darkness being opened, hence the title Alone in the Dark.
Thing about this film, it is so clear to me that this script is like a rough draft. It feels like a first draft to me because it's one of those scripts that has a lot of information and a lot of like this thing happens, then this thing happens, but it doesn't feel like there is anything that there was anything to the script at all. It basically just feels like a series of kind of like somewhat connected scenes that then coalesce into a non-ending. The basis of the narrative is so like shallow. There's so little there's like nothing to the story and there's nothing to the characters either. So I do feel like the film, even before it got filmed, like this script so needed like another draft, to become actually in any way workable.
I agree with you. It definitely needed another look because I think a lot of this film's problems were with its writing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's got so many problems in other departments as well, but its writing was seriously flawed because it relied so heavily on narration and it told us things like we didn't need to know. And it opened on a text crawler narration, which pretty much the only film that gets away with making you read at the start is either a historical drama or Star Wars,
Yeah. Hmm.
because they're the only ones that have really done it correctly, and they don't
Yeah.
usually subject you to narration at the same time. And I think
Hmm.
the narration was the exact same thing we were seeing on screen. It was so redundant. I would rather have
Yeah.
opened, and I get the opening shot wasn't particularly impressive, so maybe that's why they didn't want to open on it, because the opening shot was boring.
Hmm.
It was just one guy running to the right of screen for about 3 seconds before he even started crossing the plane, and the camera didn't move
Yeah.
with it at all. It was really dull. But
Yeah.
I would much rather have opened with that sequence, which, to be fair, the opening sequence, despite a poor performance that really dragged it down, because I really don't like the villain's performance in this film at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
No, I agree.
really wouldn't, and it
Yeah.
don't go on. The performances across the board aren't good, but that
No.
one really sticks out to me as
Hmm.
terrible. So,
Hmm.
aside from that, the opening sequence I think is actually probably the most effective sequence in the film, and I feel like it's because I don't know anything yet, so I
Hmm.
don't care. So I'm
Yeah.
not. And I actually feel some sympathy for the boy that ran away from a bad experiment. That's not a
Yeah.
bad setup. I think having the narration beforehand kind of just made me not care, and then when I was watching
Yeah.
it, I still didn't care. Like I feel like if they dropped us in on that opening sequence, it would have been more emotionally engaging and investing from the start. So
Yeah.
at least we might not hate it as much because we would have at least cared a little bit.
Funnily enough, I think that that is how the film originally began because apparently, like, according the whole backstory behind director Uwe Boll, the guy who made this film, this guy has had a really like long, interesting, weird, insane career that could make for a film on its own. But I'm not going to discuss any of that. I think what this guy Uwe Boll said was that originally when he screened this film to test audiences, they didn't have a clue what was going on in the story. So therefore, that text crawl was put in just to make the story more clear. But the problem is that, like you said, it immediately just by starting by throwing all this information at us, it does take away the opportunity for like investment because you start any film with just this like long bit of backstory, and you think to yourself, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have to remember all of this," you know? Like it almost feels like it's trying to challenge your brain to like follow it, but instead of
It's the
making things more clear, it feels very alienating.
it's the laziest form of exposition, especially because later in the film they they do explain what the Akabi are anyway. So you
Mhm.
sat through it for the first text crawl, and then you're watching it again, and it's just like, yeah, I know, skip this. I know this. Let's move on. Let's get to the next point. And I think that's the film doesn't need that
Mhm.
to make me not want to invest because I already don't want to invest.
And then, as you were mentioning about narration, you like I assume you were talking about like the Christian Slater, the Edward Carnby narration as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like in the opening bit of the film, though, he's giving this really like awkward narration, and like in the bit with the cab driver in the opening scene, he basically just kind of explains his whole gist anyway. And I was thinking to myself, did you need him to like give that internal monologue? I mean, he explained his whole deal to this cab driver, and that was like perfectly natural, you know.
Exactly. He's not secretive, and I kind of like the way he did it with the cab driver as well, actually, because that opening scene, you could tell. Sure, I honestly think the cab driver's performance was probably the best in the film, but
Oh
the
yeah.
cab driver to me, he like gave him the look of bullshit, and
Hmm.
then kind of just went, actually, do you know what, I don't care, but
Hmm.
still listened, and I was like, that's exactly what I'd expect a weirdo cab driver in LA to do. That's great.
Like he might as well have just been like the sidekick. I think honestly he would have been a good sidekick to the film if he was
Yeah.
like incorporated. You know, I think
Why he kept driving that cab after
yeah.
the guy kept coming at him, I don't know. Like, if you're the cab driver, surely, like, what purpose would you have to agree to be in a car chase? That's fucking stupid.
Well, I mean the car was chasing him as well, but
True, but like, if it,
yeah.
I don't know, he kind of seemed really enthusiastic to get into the car chase. I think that's another problem for me with the script. It doesn't understand like how people work.
To give an example of what you're talking about, there's that bit, the bit where you first see like Tara Reid for the first time, as an archaeologist or museum curator or whatever, and like, and there's that bit where like they're handling the thing that is connected to the Upkani or whatever, but he asks like, oh, what is this or whatever, like I can't remember what the question was, but then instead of her answering it, the security guard answers it. Like he says, like it's an artifact from an ancient civilization, and they just vanished or whatever. And I'm thinking, like, why would a
Why would he
security
answer
guard
that question?
know that? And why would he answer it instead of the person who presumably has been studying this stuff the whole, all this time?
I've got to admit though, that scene. Oh, it really bugs me because that security guard was just. It's literally exposition in human form. Because our introduction to the love interest of the film, the
Yeah.
way that it was done, he literally came out and was like, "Oh yeah, she's the curator of the museum. This is what that's who she is." And I was just like, does he need to know that? It's implied that they deliver regularly. That guy doesn't need that information. It was clearly there just for the
Mhm.
audience, and that's something that really frustrates me in this film because it's
Yeah.
for a lot of it, it's characters giving each other information they already know and that they don't need again.
So on the one hand, I do agree that that is a flaw, but I do feel like stuff like that could have been remedied if the characters that we did follow were like well developed, interesting, or charismatic. But there isn't a single character in this film that is remotely interesting, well developed, charismatic, or anything like that. On the one hand, like yeah, sure, there is like technically backstory for some of these people, but despite that, you still don't care about any of them. You especially do not care about Edward at all. That could just be like the writing, but it's also like Christian Slater's like lead performance, because you're seen in like films like True Romance, Heathers, or even Interview with the Vampire as well. That he is a really like charismatic actor. This had to have been during just some slump period in his career, because he just looks so bored throughout this entire film. He doesn't look remotely like he wants to be there. He just sort of looks like he's going through the motions, and that is partially because there just isn't any personality. There's nothing there that allows him to act or anything. He's
his
just
character description is literally generic badass, and you can leave it at that.
but there's not even like a supporting character to like liven things up. I mean, the closest you have is Stephen Dorff as the commander guy. But even then, like I found his performance to be like engaging in all the wrong ways, because not only does he look way too young for that part. Like, to me, the way he was acting, he acted more like a school bully than he did like a tough commander guy. Like,
Yeah,
especially
like
in that scene.
it just seemed unbelievably petty, which was just. I mean, it was amusing, but like not. I felt like it was meant to be dramatic.
It's supposed to be like that tough commander who in the end makes a noble sacrifice or whatever, but the way he was playing the part, like, again, especially in that first scene between him and like Carnby, the way he was performing it, he was saying stuff like, like that means it's none of your fucking business, and like, yeah, keep walking. Like the way he was speaking, I was just thinking to myself, like, he might as well just be like bullying a nerd in high school or something. He might just be saying like, or the bit where he's like, what's the
Well,
matter,
no,
Carnby? You got a little soft or something like that.
yeah, do you know what? It kind of reminds me of the wannabe tough guy that you always see. And the second you take a step towards him, he's like, no, I'm good, good. No, no, bro, I'm not having that fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, it was
yeah,
just
yeah,
the biggest mistake that it makes is that it decides it's going to be an action film. It's got the perfect setup for a horror film, and
hmm
it's an action film. Like, that just makes no sense to me, because it was. I mean, obviously, like when you look it up online, it's cited to be a action horror, but there's nothing
hmm
remotely scary about the film.
Not
Like,
really. It tries to be in a couple of places, but it just doesn't work. There's not even like a jolt moment or anything. It's just, and to some degree that is because it's diluted by the like ridiculous, absurd, dumb action scenes. Yeah.
I think it should have been a horror film. I mean, it's all about creatures coming in from the dark that aren't really, that you're not able to stop that easily, and they're trying to come through. I mean, honestly, it almost seems like you mix a werewolf with an extra dimensional demon into one
hmm
thing. Like,
Yeah.
that should be a really interesting horror concept. It just isn't, because they
Yeah.
decide to gun them down. And I think the worst part is the action scenes aren't even good.
Only one that was like filmed in any kind of like clear, coherent manner was maybe the first one, and that's just because it took place in broad daylight, so
And
you
even
were able to see what was going on.
and even the
But
first one had an insane number of cuts. I mean, the one
I
thing that I
know.
will give the first one is it did show that the main character was scrappy, capable, and temperamental. Like, he did a few kind of smart things in that scene, like he used the hook quite well. He knew his environment. And you kind of go, okay, I believe that this guy could take on most things that are thrown at him. So that when he is
Mhm,
taking on like these beast things, you're like, yeah, okay, I
mhm,
believe this, I guess. But
mhm.
I think that's about it. I mean, it's really quick cut, and it does, which I just hate in an action scene.
So it wasn't like shaky cam, but it was like all of the action scenes, like the big problem for me is the lighting was so dark, and that's kind of a problem during a lot of the
Yeah.
film as well. But especially during the action scenes, it's like the lighting really isn't that good. But also, it's just like I agree. It's kind of hard to describe, but to me, it just felt so like the action scenes lacked, energy. And I agree that it's kind of hard to describe, but the editing was really bad during the action scenes.
Yeah, I think
It's kind of hard. It's hard to
they had
pinpoint.
they had too many shots that didn't last long enough. I think that was
Yeah.
the major issue with a lot of the action. But also for me, like the reason the first scene worked so well and the others didn't. I mean, I say the first scene worked so well. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
the reason the first one worked at all is because the main character actually felt like he was in danger. Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
it was dangerous. It set up, oh, my gun doesn't work.
hmm
That's harder it set up challenge and response quite well, and I will give that scene that because it did. And then
Hmm.
then you had the two come after it, and any time that there was any remote danger to the lead character, who we know can take care of themselves, and it might,
Hmm.
and honestly, if he was on his own, might have been more interesting to watch respond to things,
Hmm.
because then he could actually
Yeah,
develop. You had
yeah.
Bureau 713 keep dropping in. What's the point? Like, what's the
Hmm.
point of following this lead character? We're just going to follow Bureau 713. What's the point of setting him up as outside of Bureau 713 if he's going to work with them the whole time?
Yeah,
Like, you may as well just have him inside Bureau 713 and explore that. That would
yeah.
actually make a much more interesting film.
It's one of the problems with like the script inherently. It's like you need to don't set up this backstory if it's not really going to matter. Like don't set up, oh, I was a former agent, now I'm on my own. If I'm just gonna again work with them. Aside from that, like one moment where he steals the like the ID card or whatever of Burke, the Stephen Dorff character. Like when he there's that one moment, but aside from that, for the most part, it's like they eventually at a certain point they are just allies, you know. So there's also the problem as well of the way that they do the main relationship between Edward and the Tara Reid character, because the way that they do it, first scene with them is just so hilarious. Like the
Oh,
way she just goes from like oh my god you're back to thought you were dead you asshole, like and
yeah.
then
And just
like
like it was just like A, people don't go 0 to 100 like that. It just doesn't happen. And B, it was just like you just sat there and you're like, really? Because it's in every low quality action film possible that has like a tense romantic relationship. It wasn't good the first time, and it gets worse every time you see it.
but the problem is that even then after that point, like after there's that like establishment of oh man I was in love with you and then you went off and now you're back, I don't think they ever actually like talk about it. I don't know if there's a single scene where they actually act like former boyfriend or girlfriend. They do kind of, I guess, rekindle that their relationship in that sex scene. Like it comes out of nowhere. It never gets brought up again. And the way that it is edited, you could so easily remove that scene. I was watching it, I was like laughing hysterically because it was just so like I don't think I've seen a sex scene in a film that is just so incredibly meaningless, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely felt like the person making the film just sat there and went, "I need these characters to, be in love, and I want something a bit racy to make this film a bit more edgy." And it's a bit, and you were kind of watching it, going, "Okay, you're trying hard enough. You don't need this. This just makes it look like, oh,
Again, you know, in the rest of the film, there's not a single like romantic interaction. I don't even think they kiss or anything. It's just like it's like for the rest of the film, you know, the two of them might as well just be I don't know like partners or something. You know, they don't need to be romantically involved, but you throw in this sex scene to try and like make us believe it or to make us like believe that they have rekindled some like romance that they previously had or something. But it's just so
I
yeah,
wouldn't
I
even
agree.
need to see them kiss to know they're in a relationship. I just wouldn't need to see like some sort of attraction, sort of enjoyment. They're just both so flat. And
I
that's actually
agree.
something that really annoyed me throughout the film, is just how flat the dialogue is. Like,
Yeah,
don't go wrong, it's terrible dialogue, but the actors do not help themselves at all.
as I was saying about that sex scene, you might as well have just inserted like a title card that said like sex scene here. Like, that's how obligatory and like meaningless it was.
Well, that's
Um,
that's to be fair, I think that's a problem with the film a lot though. It's like it's like they were ticking off checklist of things I need. I mean, if you look at the way that the main character does things, like there's him talking to John's wife, um,
yeah.
and aside from the exposition where she's like, "Oh, you guys were childhood friends," has he told you
Mhm.
anything? It's like, thanks, that wasn't clumsy at all. But
Yeah.
sets him up as, oh, I'm the caring good guy. I'm going to help. And then it doesn't matter anyway because he straight up kills John, and
Mhm.
his reaction to it just seems like dead. Turns around and he kind of goes, "Oh, I killed John." Pretty much,
Yeah.
pretty much like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
and
No,
then
no, I love that delivery.
and then you had Tara Reid going, "You didn't have a choice." Like
Yeah,
that, the entirety of the conversation about his childhood friend.
it could probably be that just like Slater kind of knew about the quality of the script. He just knew that there was nothing to
Oh,
this, so he just
oh yeah.
decided, all right, I'm not going to put any effort in, you know. but
Oh
which
yeah,
is still bad, you know, because like at least if he sounded a bit torn up, that would have been something, you know.
yeah, exactly. And I full on believe that's what a lot of the cast were doing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or they were massively overplaying it, like Stephen Dorff playing
yeah,
Burke, or the Doctor.
Hutchins, you know how like
I,
he's the main villain, you know.
yeah, you know, so they like really did. They really overacted it. They're also the people that I both hated their performances the most, but I also enjoyed watching them the most because at least there was something.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I agree. I mean, at least like you know, like in particular in that bit at the end, like I was just laughing because that was the bit where like where the guy playing Hudgens just went into full scenery chewing mode. I can't remember what he said, but he was
Oh,
like, but just the way he was delivering his lines, I was just thinking
he
like, wow,
just
wow, wow,
he
you are just
screamed
chewing up the scenery.
every line.
Oh, and the bit beforehand did have that great moment of acting from Dorf where he was just like, "My guys are dying out there for nothing, for fucking nothing. God damn it!" When he was
Yeah,
just,
yeah, he throws the table over.
it,
Sure,
it,
I have
it
to
was.
say, I do actually love a table flip in films, just
Mhm.
because it is a dynamic breaking of the mood, because
Yeah,
really does express anger really well, even though it is, don't get me wrong, it's completely cliche, but it's one of those that I hope it never dies, because
yeah,
even in a bad film, it entertains really well. But I think the reveal that it was part of Bureau 713. I mean, with how terrible their security is, part like their file protection, all of that. I'm amazed that that didn't ever come out before. Like,
yeah,
they're not very good at being secret. They come in like the military, shoot
hmm
up the place with the loudest guns imaginable,
hmm
and you can get you, and they're so easy to pickpocket. Like, I feel like I'd have a harder time pickpocketing a child than I would pickpocketing
Well,
Commander Burke.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree, I agree. But I just want to get onto the thing that like is most notable about this film. I think that most people would notice watching it. All the filmmaking errors in this film are so transparent. You know,
Mhm.
it's one of those films where you watch it and like because normally like whenever you're watching a movie, like there are oftentimes, you know, continuity errors or mistakes or whatever that kind of slip out. You know, it's important, and it's not. And to me, that's not a good barometer to like judge a film because every film has continuity errors or might
Oh
have
yeah,
it, or there might be a mistake or whatever. Because like in filmmaking, as hard as you try, sometimes those things just slip through.
oh yeah, it
And
always
for
does.
me,
I mean,
yeah,
don't get me wrong, as long as it's not glaringly obvious, you can get away with it a lot. I mean, quite often, if you pay attention to the windows, you might in some shots, you'll see the cameraman in a few films, and some of them are great films, and you kind of just don't care because you're focused enough on the main character because the filmmaking is strong enough.
yeah, but here, I mean, oh my god, all of the like this film, it genuinely feel like I think that there's a reason why Uwe Boll at one point in his career, some people were calling him like the new Ed Wood because he was just as inept in terms of like just like sheer in terms of just like sheer incompetence. Like there are so many examples of that in this film. Like a very like a small one at the beginning is when like Edward wakes up on that plane, like you can clearly see that his lap is empty, right? But then it cuts in and it shows that he's like holding like a magazine, and it's like there was no time for him to be able to get out a magazine, and we know that he clearly didn't have a magazine. But in this shot, in this like next shot, when that kid's asking him a question, he has a magazine for like for some reason. So there's small stuff like that which again would be like forgivable. But then there are some moments like I'll tell you the one that stuck out to me the most. It was the bit on the bridge. It was the car.
Yeah,
It was that bit because I'm very certain that in that scene Slater was not driving that car. It zooms in on this car on the bridge. I
yeah.
think it's the Golden Gate Bridge. It zooms in on this car, and there's like voiceover of him like speaking to his like colleague or whatever. It zooms in very heavily on this car. You don't see that he's in there, but you just see a car driving, so you assume that it's him, right? And then when it cuts to like him arriving at the orphanage, it's not the same car. Like I was looking and I was able to verify that that was not the same car. All I can guess is that like they just couldn't film like a scene of him driving in his car, so they just filmed a random car, or maybe for some reason they just couldn't get the same car on the 2 different days of shooting. It was like so noticeable to me. What ones did you notice?
I didn't even bother. I checked out of looking for filmmaking mistakes. I was trying to just focus on the film. I think the lighting was the biggest mistake because
Hmm.
again, it was a lot of it was really dark, and you could kind of see what was going on if you tried, but the film doesn't make you put in the effort. So
Yeah,
for me, in terms of the technical mistakes, for me, they were overshadowed just by the terrible creative choices. I don't really watch film and like massively looking for the technical mistakes because I'm more
yeah.
interested in finding the creative core of it because I like going back and looking at technical mistakes if I can see them.
Mhm.
Go, oh, better not do that again. Watching this film, I think the major things that really stood out to me was again there was a lack of energy in in the action scenes. The
I
characters were
agree.
just deadly uninteresting. The performances were awful. The directing was also awful. And I think it was a completely misgenred film. I think
Hmm.
it was horribly written.
Hmm.
I thought the CGI was just dreadful,
Yeah, I
even in
agree.
2005. Like by this point, we'd long since had Jurassic Park.
Hmm.
I know CGI got terrible in the 2000s for quite a bit of it anyway, for quite a few films. But
Hmm.
you know, I did it. If you're going to use it, I expected it more. I think the worst part of it as well is it looked bad in the dark. They stuck to the trick that you always do when you're not sure how good your effects are, of hiding it in the dark, and it still looked atrocious. Like
Yeah.
imagine that thing in broad daylight.
Yeah, which is why I guess they went to a POV shot for the final bit, and just like had added creature noises or whatever because they were aware like, okay, we can't put this in, so let's just do like a really shitty looking POV shot, at the end. I mean, and yeah, like and the other, so yeah, so I mean, like you've done a good job summarizing it, but there are so many more like issues to give an example. So I guess if we're looking at like what is it like the direction and stuff, there's also just like I agree what you said, like in general the whole film, it was this weird mixture of like being totally like of feeling very directionless and also just feeling dull. Like there was something about it, like despite the action that was in the film, the entire thing just felt completely devoid of life and energy. Like
Hmm.
it's hard to describe, but there's a lot of this movie doesn't even contain action. It's just scenes of people walking around, or people looking at computers, or people talking, or the voiceover, or whatever. It's like you have all these aspects, and you have these things that really weigh down the film already. That even when you have the action scenes that do come in, even they don't really like quicken the pulse or anything.
Well, I think the actors barely interact with set and props that much unless it's a gun,
Hmm.
and it you know and you could tell that the film is trying to have this kind of cool guy main protagonist who's better than the establishment and all of that all of that kind of stuff going on, but he doesn't do anything interesting. Like he spends the film trying to find out about his past, or saying he wants to find out about his past, but doing absolutely nothing to help himself do it.
Do you have that bit where he like takes the ID card and then looks at that body and then he finds out, oh, I had one of these things in me, but it died or whatever. Like you have that one scene, and you have that bit, and I don't know, you have that other bit where like he speaks to his like friend, the guy called like Fish, I think, and he gets like told like here's the files on all of these people who grew up in this orphanage or whatever. It's like you have those individual scenes, but aside from that, I agree. He doesn't do anything.
To me, the film kind of lacks focus because it keeps going between yes, I'm going to be motivated, and just not doing stuff. Like he spends so much time in his base, just
Hmm.
sitting there,
Yeah,
or
yeah. Like looking at computer screens, or going along with like the bureau or whatever. Yeah, I agree. Like I agree that that is like a fundamental like flaw because the thing is that like this film, it feels like an amalgamation of a lot of different films, and there are some very obvious, I guess you could say, rip-offs or homages or whatever you want to call it. Like the slow-mo feels so similar to like the Matrix. It feels like it wants to be aliens with like, you know, the soldiers and the monsters.
Yeah, and descending into the depths to fight all the monsters. Yeah.
Yeah. But what this film weirdly reminds me of is National Treasure or the Da Vinci Code or even like Lara Croft or something, where you have like this like thing that happened in the past, and you have these like ancient artifacts, and you have the hero going on a journey to like discover stuff, and he's discovering stuff about himself as well. It weirdly felt like a B grade version of like those kinds of films, and
Yeah.
it made me think to myself, like, you know, the thing that like movies like, you know, National Treasure or I don't know, I'm not going to compare it to like Indiana Jones, but you know, but stuff in that genre. The thing that those films have is they have a sense of adventure, they have a sense of fun. Like even like not good examples of those, like the Da Vinci Code, for example, I don't think is that great of a film. But at least there is a sense of intrigue. There is at least a sense of like investment or mystery. But in this film, like what should make for a fun film has just been diluted.
It feels like it's, you know, trying too hard to be something that it isn't, and
Mm-hmm.
then it isn't capitalizing on what it's got. I just don't think there's anything that could have really saved this film that's actually in it, because I think it's just one of those films that had to be reworked from the ground up.
It was based on like a video game, and you know, like a lot of bad video game adaptations, I don't think it took barely anything from like any of the games. It just took some names and the kind of concepts, and that's it. You do have other source material that you could then take and then just kind of transplant, you know, and there is enough there to where you could probably turn it into a good film.
To be fair, it's not a bad concept. It's just executed so poorly. I never want to see it again. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
the film kind of just killed my enthusiasm for that kind of story because, and do you know what? I like the Da Vinci Code. I like films like that. You know, and I thought, I actually thought the Da Vinci Code was a really good film, but
Mm-hmm.
it just feels like it wants to be in the same sort of conspiracy-ish genre with governments backing things up and a secret order and all of that, but it just doesn't land because they don't set anything up. Like they don't really set it up right. You know, it's not foreshadowed. I mean, you know, they give you all the information at the start, and I still had no idea who the doctor was. Like they turned around there and they say kind of halfway through the film, "Oh yeah, he's in the bureau," and I'm like, "Is he? Was he? When was that a thing? I thought he was just some random lunatic."
But again, you know, I think it just all comes down to, even if they just wanted to do like a low budget, like creature feature action film, even if they just wanted to do that.
If they were going to do that, you'd spend more time fixing the creature so they didn't look awful, and B, just focus it on that. Like that's completely fine as a film, but it's like the film wanted to be deeper than it was, except it didn't have nearly enough talent to do it.
I wouldn't say deeper. I would say a bit more complicated narrative wise, but I wouldn't necessarily say deeper.
Yeah, well, no, I think it was trying. Watching it, like it seemed to kind of keep concerning itself with memory and cultural memory, and the idea that you kind of needed to keep your cultural memory alive, or the same thing would happen again, and blah blah blah. Like that's what it tried to seem to be wanting to suggest, but because it didn't do anything to really highlight that theme or make that theme interesting, it just falls completely flat, and it makes it even worse because it makes it feel like it thinks it's something else than what it is. Like, I personally love watching low budget action films that know exactly what they are and pander to that, or films that know their shit and don't even try to act like there's any investment.
To bring up another like Tara Reid film, you know, like Sharknado. It's like anybody who watches Sharknado knows what they're getting into, and the people who made Sharknado know that they're not making like art. You know, they know that they're not like making something that's like good, but they do at least try and set out to like entertain people. The ending of the film could have tied into what you're talking about like cultural memory or whatever. Like it could have tied into that stuff. Like visually, what it was suggesting was that like the rapture had happened or something, because everybody had just like vanished, right?
Yeah.
But they ruin it by having a title card that says city evacuated. So you set up what could be quite an eerie ending where like so for some reason the rapture happens. Like we don't know how it happens, but the rapture happens or whatever.
Well into it as well with the Akani, they kind of they wiped themselves out because they were too curious, and then the Doctor's done the same thing, and then humanity was wiped out, and those empty streets. So that set a really good atmosphere, and I was like, okay. I mean, most of the film was terrible, but at least its ending isn't the worst. And you had that city evacuated card, and I was just like, cool. That was pointless then.
Yeah, because now
so went into that, and that could have been, especially if the film had been better, that could have been a really haunting ending.
The problem with like them putting in city evacuated is, first of all, it gives an explanation for why it's just abandoned. And also only like maybe 6 hours or whatever have passed. It goes from like nighttime to daytime, so we don't know how much time has passed. I mean, it's just another continuity mistake that they were down the place during the nighttime, and then all of a sudden they go up it's daytime.
Down there a few hours because they said day was coming in 4 hours, so I just went, okay, they've clearly been down there for like 5. Cool.
Yeah. So there is absolutely no way that you could evacuate an entire city just over the course of that little amount of time.
I mean, no, you couldn't at all.
But it's so there's also that like just complete logical error, and it's like that. But that error wouldn't exist if you just remove that title card. If you just remove the title card that says city evacuated.
Yeah, honestly, just remove the title card. That ending is actually quite solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But reflectively, it just ruins the ending of the film, and the film that needed that ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did. It at least needed like an okay, like a moment that would have downplayed your immediate reaction of like, oh my god, that sucked. I mean, especially because like the narration, he says like, what is it? He says, the gate was closed again, but like the Abkhani discovered there's a price to pay for bringing the darkness into the light. The Abkhani people were wiped off the face of the earth, and now it looks like it's happening all over again.
Yeah, and that was just that, and then the shots of the empty street and those two just alone in it. I was like, that is solid.
I mean, the city evacuated title card that comes like before that stuff is said, so already it doesn't have a lot of impact. It was also just kind of ruined by that really shitty final shot. I thought that kind of like already soured the ending, because the shot that pans over the city, if they just like had that shot and then they just like left the sounds of the creatures, then that would have gotten across the same message of oh shit, there are still creatures in the city, and maybe they'll have to like fight them or something. I feel like that would have gotten it across in a more effective manner. But
scarier.
Yeah, but then they cut to this like really shitty looking like POV shot, that like this really shitty like sped up POV shot that I guarantee you was a rip off of like the Evil Dead or something. Those like POV shots that they do. If you remember how Evil Dead ended, where it ended with that like POV shot going up to Ash or something. Yeah, it felt kind of like a rip off of that, but it also just wasn't scary at all. And it's like you had what could have been a perfectly chilling ending, and then you just ruin it.
Well, it's because we know the monsters aren't a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Really, they're meant to be. We know they're meant to be, but they get killed so easily.
I agree. Yeah,
that it's kind of just okay.
Did they even cause the city to be evacuated?
I feel like even McAllister from Home Alone could take them out.
Probably, yeah.
Like on his own.
If he had a gun, then yeah, probably.
I don't even think he'd need a gun. Just drop a prick on him, that'd do it.
Yeah.
It's just but they're that little of a threat that I'm like, yeah, Wild could probably do it.
I mean, not a lot to say about it. I mean, there's definitely more that can be said about the film, but I think that a lot of other reviewers have definitely like covered this film in a really good detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even an enjoyably bad film. It's just a bad film. Like it's one of those that just don't. It's one that I'm not happy that I've watched.
Yeah, it had some funny moments. I mean, there were some bits where I laughed where I wasn't supposed to laugh, like that flip that he does, like that made me laugh. At the beginning action scene, I mean, the sex scene that made me laugh. There were some other like just miscellaneous like moments that were funny, but overall, yeah, it just lacks any kind of like a lot of like really like unintentionally misguided awful film. The thing that they have is that films like that feel like weirdly ambitious,
Mm.
But with this film, you can tell that there was no ambition at all. It's the key thing that can often like just sink a film is when you can kind of tell like, like was Uwe Boll treating this like a passion project, or was he just doing this just so therefore we could like make a bit of money? It's like it's clear to me that he was just doing this just to kind of make money, just to like he's like, okay, I'll get a like video game, have a bunch of action, whatever. I don't care how it turns out. I just want to make money.
It just felt like it was made for nobody in particular, and it felt
Hmm.
like it was a cookie cutter. It just felt very cookie cutter, but
Hmm.
you know, then they just baked it wrong.
Yeah,
If
go
I was
ahead.
going to score both films, I'd probably give Interview with the Vampire somewhere around an 8.
Yeah.
And this film, I hesitate to even give a 1. Like,
Hmm.
it's just, I'm glad that Christian Slater has gone on to have a few more charismatic roles since.
To be fair to Uwe Boll, I think he after this film and after a few others, I think he has he. I mean, he's retired from filmmaking now, but like when he was making films, I think that there was a bit of a like jump in quality. Like I don't think any film he made after this one was as bad, you know.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I feel like this one, it was really the script. I think it was the script that really screwed this up. I think,
yeah,
it's just the flaws with the characters were just so apparent in the
yeah,
film that I just think it killed it completely.
yeah,
Because I'm always of the opinion that you can have a plot that sucks, you can have dialogue that isn't great,
uh-huh,
but if you've got strong characters, you can get through most of it. I mean, if you look back at some really great films, some great films have terrible dialogue, like Star Wars, like the original
uh-huh,
Star Wars. The dialogue is not amazing, and now
uh-huh,
that's one of my favorite films, A New Hope. You
yeah,
know that,
yeah,
but I will freely admit the dialogue is not good,
yeah,
but the characters are,
yeah.
so it works.
Or you can have like dialogue that's somewhat like hokey, but sometimes you can kind of yeah, I agree. You can forgive that if the characters are good and if the story is good. But yeah, but if the important aspects of the film aren't good, then that's how you end up noticing stuff like bad line, or in my case, yeah, these all of the filmmaking mistakes in this film. It's like I noticed them obviously because they were so apparent, but also just because there was nothing to take away my attention.
I suppose if we were being nice to the film, at least it was composed okay. The shots, I guess, you were kind of, it was following the rule of thirds and all of that. And
Yeah, I guess so. I guess
the fact that that's the nicest thing I can say about the film really shows that there's a problem, because that's so basic that it gets done automatically by most filmmakers starting out. Like,
yeah, yeah,
even if
yeah,
they've
yeah.
never studied it, it gets done automatically just because we know what it looks like.
But yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of any redeeming qualities, but I really can't think of that many. I can only like I could say it was good that it was short, but to me it actually felt longer than like 90 minutes or anything. It actually felt like very
Oh, it
like
felt
Interview with the Vampire was 2 hour. Interview with the Vampire was 2 hours, and that didn't feel as long. But this one felt really, really long for some reason.
I think it's because there's no investment. So when you're not invested, you're just kind of watching the timer go by, and you're like, okay. Again, enjoyment does speed up the time. The Dark Knight is nearly 2.5 hours long, and every time I think I've only sat there for about an hour or an
Hmm.
hour or just over, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's 2.5 hours. Cool. Yep, that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah,
But
yeah, 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 yeah.
this film felt it was just such a slog. There wasn't much happening like at all on an emotional level, so you're kind of just there like, okay.
And not much on an action or excitement level, or even
No, exactly.
yeah. And even some films that aren't that good at least have a story that makes you like wonder where they're going. But this film kind of just stumbled through itself. It just sort of like was like
Literally,
it
stuff
just
happened.
sort of yeah, 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 yeah. It just sort of stumbled. It didn't feel like there was much a sense of like momentum or direction or anything like that. It just sort of was like this happened, then this happens, then this happens. And yeah, I think we should stop here. I think.
So yeah, those were our thoughts on Interview with the Vampire and Alone in the Dark. I would definitely recommend watching Interview with the Vampire. I think it's one of the more interesting vampire films out there, and I think it does something a bit different that I've not really seen done with vampire films since. So that's quite nice. Give Alone in the Dark a miss if you've not seen it.
The only way I could maybe recommend it is that there are some moments in it that if you watch with your friends, you might like have a good time laughing or making fun of, but it's not quite entertaining enough.
Interview the Vampire, I think we both recommend. Alone in the Dark, I think we both wouldn't.
No.
Because we're hesitant to even do it ironically.
All right, so
next time,
yeah.
What do you feel like having a look at, Rob?
We could look at the two Sin City films, and that's just because it's been 15 years after the first Sin City and like 6 years after Dame to Kill For. So I'm thinking like maybe we could revisit both of those films. Maybe.
Yeah, I think Sin City would be nice. Yeah, no, that'd be good. So yeah, no, next time we'll be chatting through Sin City.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody.